Joseph Watson joining us in the UK. He's got a couple of articles up on Infowars.com today. Of course, the staged Foley beheading is being used as a poster child for a Syria attack. We had an article just last Friday saying the Obama administration said that Foley's execution was, quote, an attack on our country. And the Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, said it was the first ISIS attack on America. This reminds me of the saying that Stalin always said, you know, 1 million deaths is a statistic, but 1 death is a tragedy. They're trying to bring this home, especially for Americans. They showed people dying of sarin gas a year ago in Syria, and perhaps they thought that Americans didn't get involved in that because it wasn't Americans that they saw dying. But actually, what happened was we also exposed that it was not really a case that it was only the Syrian government of Assad that could have done that. We made it very clear that there had been previous attacks of sarin gas where the United Nations, as well as Russian and American intelligence analysts, had said that the sarin gas had been used by rebels previously to that. And so it wasn't true that that could have only been Assad. So the whole narrative a year ago failed. At that time, they wanted to go to war with Assad in Syria. Now they want to go to war on his side against the people that they were funding over the last year. And there's been an interesting development over the weekend. That's why we have Paul Joseph Watson on, is that experts in the UK are saying that this video of the beheading was likely fake. So I want to go to Paul now. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Hi, David. Good to be back.
Now, this video, tell us some of the aspects, before we get into the implication of how they're trying to use this to start another war. Tell us what these experts in the UK are saying about this video, why they believe that it was fake.
Well, I made a video last week, Thursday, questioning whether this was fake, because what piqued my interest was the fact that UK authorities, the police, came out and said, literally hours after this video was released, that if you watch this video of this alleged beheading on YouTube, not merely share it, disseminate it, post a link on Facebook, if you simply watch it, then you could be a terrorist. You could be breaking laws under the Terrorist Act. So that suggested to me that they weren't too keen on people watching it. So I made a video on Thursday questioning some of the aspects of this so-called beheading clip. To make it clear from the start, in the original clip of this so-called ISIS beheading of James Foley, you do not see Foley being beheaded. All you see is 6 so-called slashes of the knife across his neck, and then it fades to black. Then it cuts to a still image of Foley's decapitated head resting on his body. So at no point do you actually see him being physically beheaded. And all these points that I'm making now were replicated by these forensic experts that came out yesterday and said the same thing that I said and many others said last week. The other main point, David, is the fact that when he's reading out his speech, Foley, before he's beheaded, he's completely calm, he's completely composed. Yes. It's not the behavior of somebody who knows that they're about to be brutally slaughtered. And in fact, the forensic experts came out afterwards and said that he actually had to redo one of his lip in the footage. They said he had to refilm one of the lines because he mucked it up. So he was going off a script. Yeah. His demeanor was obviously not of a person waiting to be beheaded. So we'll get into it more after the break.
Well, it was interesting, and I want to talk after the break, too, about this censorship, because that is a major reversal. I mean, we ought to be concerned at any time that the government says watching a video makes you a terrorist, and yet they've been very accepting of ISIS and other terrorist groups' Facebook postings and social media postings. At the same time, when we put things up, they will censor it if we try to share it with other people. So that was a very amazing reversal of their policy to say, but don't even look at this, even though they had left the previous Islamic terrorist social media postings up for everybody to see, censoring people who are pushing back against that. So that right there raised a lot of flags, besides setting a very dangerous precedent for everyone.
Exactly, the free flow of information precedent. And, yes. You know, we saw the images flashed across the news. We saw the narrative being pushed. And yet they were encouraging, not just encouraging, but warning people not to watch the video, which suggested to me that there was something very wrong with it indeed. And again, it completely contradicts previous beheading videos where you have a group of these militants surrounding the individual, They all chant Allah Akbar as he's being killed. They cite the Quran before they kill him. You'll see none of this in the James Foley video.
I think it's also interesting that the guy who did it is supposedly a British guy as well. So we'll talk about all that when we come back.
Now you can watch The Alex Jones Show live as it happens at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
More than 60 movies and documentaries all in one place at Infowars.com/show.
And joining me right now from the UK is Paul Joseph Watson. We've been talking about his articles. He analyzed the video last week talking about the Foley beheading and said that he had concerns based on the fact that it was, we were told not to watch it. We were threatened not to watch it. We were threatened that we would be considered terrorists. It's an amazing reversal of what the UK and the American governments have done, essentially giving carte blanche to these Islamic terrorist groups and their social media postings while censoring people from sharing our information many times on Infowars.com's Facebook site. So it was an amazing reversal, and so that got his curiosity up. I think other people were curious about that as well, and so we had some experts testify this weekend that they believe that it was a fake beheading. But this is all being done to set the stage, again, for war. A year ago, it was war with Syria. Now, a year later, it's war with Syria, except this time it's with Assad instead of against Assad. This time, they want to go to war with the group that they were funding and training last year. And when everybody said that we were not going to be al-Qaeda's Air Force, we had Ted Cruz say that. We had Dennis Kucinich say that. And it was true. We were equipping and training these guys. And they said, we're not going to be their Air Force. There was a questionable trying to blame the sarin gas attack, saying that it could have only come from the from Assad, and that narrative failed at the time with analysis, and so now they're coming up with something different. Paul, I'm reminded of the fact that Henry Kissinger said that we don't have any permanent allies, only permanent interests. I think maybe the permanent interest of the American government is to somehow get involved in a war in Syria. It doesn't really matter which side we get on, does it?
Well, exactly. This is the poster child for military expansion into Syria. As you said, Ghouta, 2013, almost a year ago, actually, just over a year ago, chemical weapons attack, obviously blamed on the Assad government. We talked to eyewitnesses who went to the very region, talked to the rebels who were stationed in the region, and that's included an Associated Press reporter who went there, or who coordinated with another reporter who went there. And they said that the Saudis had provided the chemical weapons to the rebels. They had mishandled them, causing this chemical weapons tragedy. Of course, it was blamed on Assad immediately to grease the skids for war. MIT later investigated the incident, concluded that it could not have been launched from a government area. But at the end of August 2013, we were right on the verge of going into Syria. It was only derailed at the last minute. So... And
here we are again, a year later, in August, except that this time they've got a different pretense for going to war, and they want to fight on a different side, but still in Syria. Isn't that interesting?
It's also interesting that some of the neocons are saying, well, Obama should have armed the rebels in the first place, then ISIS wouldn't have spread, which again is a complete misnomer, because most of the rebel groups became more and more hardline, and in fact, many of them defected to ISIS. So they were supported, in fact, with some weapons and hundreds of millions of dollars of aid from...
I think we're breaking up a little bit on your Skype feed there.
The talking point is...
I think we're losing you a little bit on Skype here. It's essentially, too, I remember a number of years ago, there was a site, I think it was either National Lampoon or The Onion, and they had a headline making fun of the fact that Americans are really only concerned about what happens to Americans. And it was something like, Chaostan earthquake kills millions, 2 Americans feared missing. So they're trying to bring this particular one home by showing an American journalist being killed. That's what the narrative is about. I think they're trying to, I think we got Paul back with us now. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, a lot of these videotapes get released at opportune times for military expansion in the Middle East. So before the surge, or just as the surge was ending in 2007, a bin Laden tape popped up, which criticized the US government for its inaction in the Middle East. Again, before the 2004 election, of course, we had bin Laden pop up. Many attributed that to Bush winning the election. Several other examples. So these so-called Al-Qaeda or terrorist videotapes have only ever proven opportune for the US military-industrial complex, and we now see that happening again.
The rhetoric is really over the top as well. As I mentioned, this article from Friday, headline, Obama administration says that Foley's execution is, quote, an attack on our country. And the Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, said it was the first ISIS attack on America. In other words, you know, this is a direct attack on America. And yet we have the Obama administration standing down at the border, completely opening it up, having the Border Patrol standing down, essentially. And as we've reported many times, there are people from all nationalities, not just people from Central America, that are able to come through that. And it's open to terrorists from the Middle East. It's open to terrorists from Central and South America, because many of these drug cartels are terrorist groups. They're they're not just engaged in drug trafficking, they're doing human trafficking, they're kidnapping, they're killing people, they're beheading people who oppose them. So there's not a whole lot of difference between the actions of these people, and yet they're using this open immigration as cover to try to get people in. They're also trying to portray it in the media as if it's just children coming across. If they were really concerned about this, and if they were really concerned about terrorism coming to America, I would think that they would do something about the border.
Well, exactly. There's a lot of talking points today about, you know, ISIS, all they need to do is get on a plane to attack America. Well,
they don't even have to do that. They can just walk across the border.
Exactly. And now we're seeing, you know, Lindsey Graham, who's been pushing for well over a year for the attack on Syria, he's back pushing this narrative. There's a new context, they call it, a new context given to this impetus by this James Foley beheading video. So it's a poster child for a war on Syria, basically. There's some noise about, oh, we could coordinate with Assad to attack ISIS. Again, Assad has said on many occasions, any military involvement by the US aggressing against Syria is an act of war. So I don't believe for a second that they're going to coordinate with Assad and that he's going to accept it. It's not going to happen. And again, this is all based on what these forensic experts have said is a fake video. Now we know ISIS is brutal, savage. They've killed hundreds of thousands of people in cold blood. Why would they censor their own video? Why would they not behead Foley and show it to the world for the shock value? Because I've suggested, and it's pretty clear from this video and from the analysis, that this video was not produced and released by ISIS. It was most likely produced by the same kind of companies linked with the military-industrial complex that we've seen produce Al-Qaeda videos before.
Yeah, as you mentioned in the article, and as you mentioned in the last segment, you see them drawing a knife across his neck 6 times, but there's no blood to be seen. And then, as you just pointed out, they do a cut, you know, a video cut, I should say, and come back showing the head off. So why would, as you point out, why would they censor this when they put up all of this other graphic stuff? And why would our governments say you're not allowed to watch this when they essentially promote this stuff? They just want the narrative to go out there for the usual suspects like Lindsey Graham, who, as I said before, he's kind of like 100% Machiavellian with a thin veneer Gomer Pyle. This guy is always there pushing war, along with John McCain, who was photographed in Syria with Al-Qaeda rebels and terrorists just a year ago, trying to push these guys into war. Now we're supposed to go to war against the guys that Lindsey Graham and McCain supported a year ago.
It's amazing, and I mean, you can delve into it even more. If you zoom in on the actual beheading, the so-called moment of beheading, which we don't actually see, but when he starts to cut the throat, you can see the guy's actually got what looks like blood packets ready to release, and he starts releasing them, and then the video cuts to black. So there's all kind of analysis going into this, but it's again, his demeanor before he's being beheaded is composed. This is not a guy who thinks or knows he's about to be brutally slaughtered. I mean, anyone else wouldn't even be able to speak, never mind calmly read out this script.
Yes.
And it just looks like a theatrical production, and that's what these experts said. And it's just amazing for me to be called a conspiracy theorist last week, and then these top experts working for British police basically make all the same points I did in my YouTube video, and yet it's still kind of under the radar, and we're still treating this video as a real Cass's belly, a real, something that greases the skids for war, when it's obviously staged.
Yeah, Anthony Freda has a great graphic. I don't know if we've got that up or not. I think that was going to go up on the site, essentially showing these guys to get the idea. Do you guys have that graphic there? I don't know if we've got it up on the site or not. But basically, he's got this picture that you've seen of Foley on his knees and the guy in black standing behind him with the knife. And they're standing on a set. That's a giant green screen behind them, and then you see the composited picture on a monitor in the front and all the studio lights and everything. I mean, that basically says it all, doesn't it, Paul?
It does, and I mean, this stretches back years. We were doing articles in 2007, Al-Qaeda videotaped, digitally doctored. They actually discovered that the terrorist logo was being embedded into the video at the same time as the Intel Center logo. Intel Center was a company that screened terrorist videos basically for the Pentagon, released them having obtained them, who knows how, from terrorist groups. But they actually found out that the terrorist media, their logo was being added to the video at the same time as Intel Center, this group that basically works for the Pentagon. And this happened numerous times. We documented it over and over again. And those videos they tailed off and stopped. But now they're back with yet another one. And it's even more suspicious.
We've got, for people who are watching the feed now, we've got that picture I was just describing of the graphic that Anthony Freda did. That basically shows the U.S. government on one screen. They show the composite picture on another. And then you see this big studio set with a green screen and the two guys standing in front of it. There apparently doesn't seem to be any limit as to what they will do to control public opinion. And, of course, we've seen in the past, and you've reported on it in the past as well, Paul, how they're focusing on manipulating opinions. They did a study in Facebook. I think that was your article where they used Facebook postings to try to modify people's attitudes, to try to make them happy, to try to make them sad. We've seen that Palantir has purchased a company that basically data mines social networks, specifically Twitter. One example of what they were able to do was during an award show, they were able to monitor people who were talking about particular hairstyle of a couple of particular actresses and then send them a specific product targeted, where they could get that same kind of hairstyle. That company has been now bought by Palantir, which was essentially created by the CIA, In-Q-Tel, their venture capital company. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to monitor everything in social media. They're trying to manipulate public opinion in social media, just like they're manipulating people to buy a particular hairstyle. They want to see what you're talking about, and then they want to send you information that's basically going to either reinforce what you're talking about or essentially change you from one opinion to another. Precisely.
They're doing that not only to monitor political opinions. I remember that famous scene in V for Vendetta where they cruised down the street picking up people's payroll with the government. And it's a similar kind of thing. There was a story recently about DARPA. They're being tasked with gathering information. In fact, they were hiring a subcontractor to do it, to gather information on how prone Americans are to civil unrest and riots. Mm-hmm. Obviously, with what happened in Ferguson over the past couple of weeks, that's a major concern. So they're developing these tools to monitor social media and private conversations, not only to gauge people's political opinions, but to gauge when unrest and riots is coming sooner rather than later.
Yes, absolutely. On a different note, I wanted to, and maybe I'm just kind of springing this on you, but I just noticed that they're having a final TV showdown tonight, debate in Scotland on independence. And they say this is the final debate that they're having there. Break that down for the people here in America. I know we got Scottish John that comes on a lot and does a promo for us. Tell us what's going on there in the UK in terms of Scotland, because we see this kind of devolution or secession that's going on in many places all over the world. People desiring, I think, in many cases, to have a little bit more local control. And so we see alliances that have been together, particularly in this case. They say Scotland's had a 307-year union with England, and there's a lot of people in Scotland, even though it's a minority of the people, it's still 43% against 57%. 43% of the people would like to break away from the UK, have their separation in Scotland, independence.
Yeah, I think that's a reflection of the corruption basically emanating out of London. And again, I agree with you. Any move towards devolvement where power is concentrated in more hands, you know, it's local, it's not national, is something to be celebrated. So, you know, while it's not an issue that I've followed that closely, the general principle of it, I would vehemently agree with. And I know for a fact that the establishment media in Britain has been vocally against it, pushing against Scotland's basically their secession from the United Kingdom. So it's something that I personally would support.
And of course, we've seen this happening in various places throughout Europe. We've seen it in Spain and other places where you have different regions who essentially want to have a little bit more self-rule. At the same time, in America, though, we see everything being more and more consolidated, and we also see that the consolidation is coming at an international level through these trade agreements that are happening. All of this is part of what General Petraeus said when he was in London. What comes after after America? And he said, well, that's the North American Union. So at the same time that people are trying to get their independence in many places like Scotland, there's a big move for that. There is, at the top, they're moving to the next level. They look at the North American Union as being something that's been an accomplished fact for 20 years, so now they're trying to create a union between the North American Union and the European Union. I think that's probably why we're seeing the rise of parties like UKIP in the UK as well, isn't it? Pushing back against that kind of consolidation.
Precisely, and I mean, this agenda for world government, which in terms of Europe was happening way back in the 50s, they wanted to create a European political federation run directly from Brussels. In fact, there are Bilderberg documents which talk about that at length. They introduced it under the guise of a free trade agreement to slip it under the radar, and it gradually built up after that. So they planned to get their 3 pillars of world government in place by the year 2000. They're way behind schedule, which is now why we see these secret agreements taking place, like TPP, to try and fast track that because of the failures that they've had so far in conventional means. So definitely remains the agenda.
And it was just last Wednesday that we had the CEO of the John Birch Society. He'd written a book specifically about that, how they were going to have global governance and unification through trade agreements. And now we see that happening. We see that kind of secretive, closed government where these agreements are being negotiated in secret and our elected representatives are not even allowed to view the agreement. But in the few minutes that we've got left of this hour, I want to talk to you, Paul, about ISIS. Kind of break it down in general. We got a little bit away from that in the last segment. I started talking about the Scotland independence vote, but let's get back to ISIS. Talk about it in general. Tell us about its origins, its funding. Just kind of break that down a little bit for the audience.
Well, this is the elephant in the living room nobody talks about when we're, you know, getting increasingly involved again in Iraq and Syria, is being funded by America's biggest allies in the region. They're being called the richest terrorist group that ever existed. Their money is coming from Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, as well as Turkey. In fact, the Iraqi prime minister went on live television not long ago and pointed the finger directly at Saudi Arabia. He accused them of, quote, inciting and encouraging the terrorist movement. I accuse them of supporting politically and in the media and supporting them with money and buying weapons for them. So that was the Iraqi prime minister accusing Saudi, America's closest allies in the region, of directly supporting with weapons and training ISIS militants. And of course, we know back in 2012, many of these ISIS insurgents were in fact trained by the US at a secret base in Jordan in 2012. And again, they were training these militants to try and overthrow Bashar al-Assad, even though we saw videos that Foley beheading, we saw FSA rebels cutting out the internal organs of Syrian army soldiers and eating them on camera. We saw numerous beheadings, numerous slaughters of women and children, worse than anything you're going to see in that Foley video. And that was all being backed by your tax money, basically, by the US, by Britain, yes, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And so, again, a lot of these rebel groups that started off as so-called moderate rebel groups in Syria became increasingly more extreme, joined more extreme groups, pledged allegiance to the likes of Jabhat al-Nusra, and then later on ISIS. So the origin of this spread of ISIS throughout Syria, throughout Iraq, can be directly traced back to the Obama administration's policy of not only supporting FSA rebels in Syria, but in fact the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, because they then took a lot of those extremists, shipped them over into Syria to radicalize the factions that were already active in Syria. So this is blowback, if you want, deliberate malfeasance on behalf of the Obama administration and its foreign policy in Libya and Syria.
And, of course, it's been going on much longer than that. It was the Reagan administration that essentially created al-Qaeda. At the time, they were calling them Mujahideen. And, of course, they also funded Central American revolutions. And it's always about a constant state of war. Of course, they have financial interests, immediate interests that they get rewarded for, but it is also about a constant state of war, having an enemy out there. They were very concerned about the peace dividend when that broke out. It's like, well, what are we going to do? We're going to have to downsize the military? We're going to have to get rid of the CIA? No, we've got a new mission for them, terrorism. Of course, it will never end because the enemy is so amorphous. Thank you for joining us, Paul Joseph Watson from the UK.
Alex Jones here to break down some exciting developments in the area of research concerning supplemental iodine. It's nothing less than phenomenal. I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. And I used some of the mainline iodine supplements and they upset my stomach and I had some issues with it. Until I discovered a product being developed by Dr. Group, who I was already interviewing as an expert on my radio show, and I began taking the product before he actually rolled it out. You now know it as Survival Shield True Nascent Iodine that your body can really absorb. Then, about a year ago, he said, listen, if you think this is powerful, I'm going to come out with rare earth, deep earth crystals that are incredibly powerful that no one else has as a source for their iodine from between 7,000 and 12,000 feet, literally drilled out of the ground. You put it on a hot plate and it turns into the pure gas. No one else has 99.99% pure iodine. And the results that I personally have had have been life-changing. I was over 270 pounds. And with the iodine, exercise, and better diet, I have lost now more than 50 pounds total, and I'm continuing to lose the weight. I have more energy, my libido, all this crap came out of my skin. I believe our research is conclusive. This is the best iodine out there. And I know this for a fact. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. This is innovating. This is trailblazing. And the best part is it helps fund Infowars.com, the radio show, the TV show, the whole media operation promoting true libertarian ideas. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox special at InfoWarsLife.com.